It looks like we're getting off to a good start this week. It looks like we're into almost summer-like weather with some of the daytime highs that we're going to be seeing over the course of the next week, but very little rain involved with any of that. So perhaps somebody out there who may have a solution should start working on that, get cracking on that very, very quickly. We talked last week with Randy Staples about how dry it happens to be around the northwestern region. He's going to join us a little later this morning. We have a couple of other things we're going to be talking about with him today. He's taken issue with those folks who objected to the Hindu prayer at the state legislature last week. We'll get his take on that coming up sometime in the next half hour. Also, did you know, speaking of the Great Northwest, that the three states comprising this region, that would be Idaho, Oregon, Washington, at least in the far northwest, are among the biggest wood-burning states in the country? Well, some environmentalists want you to stop, and they will obviously themselves stop at nothing. We'll talk about that a little bit later if we have an opportunity in the program. But off the top today, I wanted to mention something about your local newspaper, which I don't know. It's a fairly cliche thing to say it makes a good birdcage liner or fish wrapper, or if you run out of toilet paper, you finally have a serious use for it. We've all had our fun making those types of jokes about it, but a lot of the people who work in the newspaper industry today, they're clearly Marxist-Leninists, and it's just an opportunity for them to try. Their assignment has been to go out and try to spread their message. In other words, break up the culture that we have. It's a very Alinskyite approach to everything. Break up the culture we have, and then when it's completely destroyed, we can rebuild our socialist dreams into a great utopia. Never worked anywhere else, but they somehow believe that they have the answers, and that if they would only get the opportunity, they could correct the problems of socialism and communism in the past, 100 million dead or so that have been left behind those systems. It's 8:08. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. 38 at our studios, looking for a high up into the 60s today, even warmer tomorrow. A couple of days over the next week, we're looking at temperatures in the 70s with plenty of sunshine. Maybe one cloudy day in there and a few clouds otherwise, but overall it looks to be a very sunny and warm stretch of weather ahead of us for the next week. So I was looking through the newspaper yesterday, this newspaper called the Times News. I think this is the same guy who was leaving for Illinois. Is it John Alexander? Is that the name? Who's despised the people of Idaho ever since he moved here. He keeps trying to, he makes allusions in his writing to racism and Alabama and Mississippi. I guess he feels that those places are racist. He grew up on Long Island where there's no such thing. Yeah. So I saw this yesterday, and you can just tell this guy is just the viciousness of this fellow, the slippery slope of parental rights. Now, he's taking on people who should really have the opportunity to educate their own children in their own way. But of course, being a liberal, he has a special knowledge, self-evident truth that the rest of us don't have, so he needs to straighten us all out. And he says, the Idaho Senate State Affairs Committee on Monday should kill the obvious piece of glad-handing for the unhinged, commonly known as the Parental Rights Bill. The guy goes on to write, it's a smokescreen for the bill's true intent, the sanitation of all things found offensive by the black helicopter set. In other words, they won't be able to preach their communist revolution if parents actually get a say in what goes on in schools in Idaho. The trio's legislation, he writes, which squeaked through the House late last month and now lingers like a rash in the Senate. Boy, this guy just drips hate, doesn't he? He goes on to write, seeks to expand parental involvement in education, backers say. What it would actually do is create an unworkable a la carte education system where parents could suddenly ban the basic principles of biology, literature, and U.S. history. It's a movement for a crowd that would rather forget rather than learn from the annihilation of Native Americans, slavery, Jim Crow, and the Vietnam War. Mistakes. Who, us? Well, first of all, I have friends who fought in that Vietnam War, and they will tell you that they did not see it as a mistake. They saw the fact that we didn't finish it as being the mistake. Number two, if we annihilated the Native Americans, and by the way, I was born in the United States, that makes me a Native American, and American being a European name, so they weren't even Americans. He's talking about indigenous people. But on the other hand, I have a great many friends who are indigenous. In fact, I grew up with one of them. He unfortunately passed away at the young age of 46 just a few years ago. but he actually lived with us for a while when I was a kid. We shared the same household and the kitchen table and became very good friends. So he's not annihilated because he was still around until just a few years ago. So that stretches credulity just a bit. And by the way, there is no slavery left in this country. There is slavery, though, in hundreds of places around the world still going on. Some of those people we're actually trying to fight right now in the Middle East and North Africa. And he also mentions Jim Crow. Well, for liberals, every day is still 1964. They can't get over it. You know, they just their absolute hate just bubbling out of their skin like oil oozing out of them. They cannot get over these issues, and so for them, nothing has changed. The writer goes on to say there are private and public alternatives for parents who aren't comfortable with the standard public syllabus. And then he writes, but putting non-professionals at the helm of curriculum building is a recipe for confused students, and he said propaganda-laced fake history. Well, right now we have school boards, which are pretty much local people who are running local school systems, do we not? What does he want? He wants to bring in the academics from all over America and say, all right, you know, these people are smarter than everybody else. They say so. So we're going to put them in charge. He writes, bills such as this are fueled by paranoia, fear of new ideas, and a twisted longing for a past that never existed. Well, he may have grown up in the throes of despair on Long Island, but where I was growing up on the completely western side of New York State, I grew up in an idyllic background that was more like the Andy Griffith Show. So I can attest that there were times in this country, long before the hippies and the leftist academics and the liberals took over, that happen to be wonderful times in the United States. Now, what does he want in our schools? I came across this today at the Daily Caller. The latest version of a top-selling study guide for the Advanced Placement European History exam explains the French Revolution with a chart which identifies Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas as a fascist and pairs him with the Ku Klux Klan, or the Ku Klux Klan. All right? So this is what he's asking for. He wants this sort of alternative. Barron's AP European History, 7th edition, makes the claim, intended for consumption by American high school students, on page 168. The chart attempts to compare modern American political affiliations with the various factions involved in the French Revolution. The chart moves politically from left to right. The far right of the chart is labeled fascist. The authors demonstrate modern-day fascists by pairing Thomas and the KKK in the same box. Barron's typifies the far right during the French Revolution with wealthy people who fled France. The far left of the same chart is labeled communist. For the French Revolution, poor city dwellers present at the far left. For today's politics, the authors choose anarchists. The chart as a whole is convoluted, yet crudely, embarrassingly simplified. Now, I'm not going to read you the entire story, but there you go. This is the education Lefty wants for your kids. And unfortunately, they get angry when someone suddenly in the back of the room stands up and says, not my kid. Now, I will agree with this joker over at the newspaper that parents do have the option of taking their kids out of public schools. And you know what? They should. In fact, if we had a voucher system, parents could make those decisions on their own. But right now, if you'd like to send your child to a private school or a parochial school, you have to pay not only for everybody else's kid, you pay twice. You're getting done twice, because you're paying taxes to educate the kids in the public schools, as well as paying the tuition to send your children off to a school where they may actually get a good, rigorous, and classical education, instead of all of this basket-weaving hoo-ha that we're currently getting shoved at us in the public school system. It's 8:15. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also, you can hear us anywhere around the world at newsradio1310.com. It won't be quick enough that this guy leaves town. And actually, if he needs a little help, maybe we should get behind his car and push him to the city line or the county line or the state line. Or maybe someone can actually buy him a plane ticket and get him out of here as quickly as possible. Because people like this, they're poison to the local culture. They're absolutely death to the local culture. You can reach our program today. You can call us at 736-0300. That is 736-0300. And you know, he's leaving and he thinks he's going to somewhere prettier, better, and that he'll find a lot more fellow travelers in Illinois. In Chicago, he might. In Springfield, he might. I'm not sure he's going to those places. If he's going to somewhere in southern Illinois, he's going to have a very rude awakening. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
He's going to have a very rude awakening.
Can you turn off the delay, please? Or the phone, or the radio?
On your mind.
All right.
Morning, Bill.
Good morning.
I noticed in the paper yesterday it shows I think it was a billy goat with a Republican name on it, Selma. Bill, when that was all going on, the South was still Democrat.
Well, it's a different Democrat Party from the Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama Democrat Party than what we see today. And every time I hear that comparison made saying, well, the Democrats are to blame, those Democrats are all dead. So I'm not one of those conservatives who's going to take the easy route on that one. But trying to blame it on Republicans today, what happened 50 years ago, is more than a stretch. And you're up next on KLIX. It's 8:17, and who do we have here?
Pick up any car you want. I will pay it as long as you leave first.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. You can send the check to me at KLIX. It's 415 Park Avenue, right here in Twin Falls, Idaho, 83301. And I would be glad to collect all of those checks from you liberals because you've been taking money out of my pockets for all of these years with your own social programs. Yep, there he goes again. Hey, I pay for your college. I pay for your groceries. I pay for your heat. And that's just scratching the surface. What more do I need to do for all of you? What more do your fellow countrymen need to do? We're all struggling to try to pay our own bills, our own health care, and find a way to live once we retire, if we get a chance to retire. And Libby out there seems to think that I've got just a few more quarts of blood I can give on a daily basis. 8:19, Bill Colley with you again this morning. Some of the people coming up a little later in the program, we're going to be talking to a woman about an event, advertising event, and how you can reach a particular segment of the population if you're in business that you may have been forgetting. And it's a big segment of the population. It might be 20% of the local population that is not being reached by some advertising, and your business could benefit. We're going to talk about a program that's coming up in a few days, if you'd like to attend, that could perhaps give you some idea of how you can better expand your business. Number 2, Randy Staples will be joining us at 8:40 this morning or thereabouts, and he's going to join us from the Idaho Weekly Briefing and give us his take on a few things that are going on in state government and the like. Also coming up a little later in the program today, if you didn't see it, published over the weekend in the Washington Post, still up on the website, I believe. You talk about a guy who's now trying to whitewash his past, Jeb Bush, big supporter of Common Core in the schools. Well, he wrote an opinion piece, a guest editorial that says, "Let states take the lead in education. Pay no attention to everything I've done in the past. No, that's all wrong, and I hope that you've forgotten it already." We've got to talk a lot more about that coming up. Also, vaccines. Some people in Idaho just simply don't want to get them. More details ahead on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 20 after 8. How many of you who are tuning in today actually burn wood in order to heat your homes? I grew up in that situation. In fact, in the living room, we had an old wood box, firebox that we would use to heat the living room. Sometimes it'd be 85 degrees in there on a Saturday night in the middle of winter. And then on the other end of the house, we had a great big old wood furnace. And we had more wood than we knew what to do with because, of course, we had a hill behind the house just, covered with trees. And we tried to keep that somewhat clear of a lot of the trees just falling down and clutter and the like. So there was a great way when I was a young guy for my family to save a little money. We have been told, though, over the years that actually heating with wood is not the most efficient way to heat a home. Fireplaces often get blamed for being among the least inefficient means to warm up the house, although still very popular. I had a friend a number of years ago, flaming liberal. Well, we worked together, so we were friendly from work, but he is liberal on so many issues. He thinks that it's okay to stick scissors in a baby's head when it's in its mother's womb, to terminate a pregnancy. He's been voting for Democrats all of his life. He's one of these knee-jerk guys. He believes in the simple caricatures of political parties. But I went to visit. He also teaches at a university, a large university in Michigan, and he's been teaching at the university level at a number of different colleges over the last 20 years. But I went to visit him when he was teaching at a state school one time. I was living in Vermont, and he didn't live far away, and I went to visit his house, and he had his fireplace going, and I said, look, for a liberal, why are you doing this? I mean, you know that this is the least inefficient way to heat your home. And he says, I like the way it looks. Okay, there you go. Something beautiful. Well, look, at Christmas time, when you see that on TV where they put the burning log on TV, they've discovered that people will sit in front of the television set, sometimes for hours, watching a picture of a burning log. It's comforting. It's 8:25. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. And I'm glad you're with us on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Where else would you rather be? Also over at newsradio1310.com online. You can listen to us anywhere around the world. Story on the AP Wire today. Idaho, Oregon, and Washington residents are among. Did you know this? This is really going to anger the left. The top polluters in the nation when it comes to fine particle emissions from burning wood to heat homes. Did you know also that wood burning is also popular in Oregon? A third of residents in the densely populated Portland region burn wood. Now, you may know Portland is one of the most liberal places on the planet. But like my liberal college professor friend, they all like looking at those logs burning. So do as I say, not as I do. We have a caller with us, 736-0300. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning, sir. Hope you're having a good day.
Yes.
Anybody that has complained about wood being efficient has never harvested their own wood. Wood warms you when you cut it, warms you when you stack it, warms you when you cut it, split it, warms you again when you burn it.
Yeah,
very efficient.
My experience with cutting it and stacking it, and I had to do that a lot, was, in fact, I had to be the guy who went outside when it was 20 below to actually grab it off the wood pile to bring it back inside. And I used to discover when I'd get out there that that possum, a large possum, used to like to sleep atop the wood pile, and I used to have to try to figure out how to get around him to get the wood because he didn't seem to like my presence in that situation. But I'll tell you what, it kept the house nice and toasty.
Yep.
Thank you much for the call, sir. We would on Saturday nights, we would load up that wood stove and we would sit down. Now, growing up near, as many of you have, growing up near the Canadian border, we used to watch a TV program called Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday nights. So what we would do is we'd cook up this huge bowl of popcorn, and you'd sit down in the living room, and there'd be the fire going. It'd be 80, 85 degrees. It wouldn't be that in the morning, of course, because you get it really hot with wood, then you go to bed, and by morning you still have a warm house, even though, the wood fires died down. But we'd sit down, and you'd have the lights off in the house, other than the wood fire going, and then the TV on, and there was this bright light from the hockey arena, which made you feel a little warmer too. And that's the way I spent my formative years growing up, especially these fond memories of Saturday night, popcorn, a hockey game, and a nice warm house. And you can't beat it. But you know what's coming with this story. They're floating it now. It was, I believe, in the Idaho Statesman over the weekend, and it's being floated now as well on Associated Press. This is the stalking horse for the federal government coming in and saying you can't be doing this any longer because this is inefficient. Tell you what, you go back to heating in a more traditional way. Well, don't use oil, don't use coal. Those would be wrong too. Tell you what, go buy yourself some really expensive solar panels, and your neighbors will gouge them. We'll take the money from them too, and they can pay for half of your solar panels. Problem solved. That's the move they're looking at right now. That's the direction they are trying to hurt us. And you've got to resist. You've got to say no. The reason people, as our caller said, that they heat with wood is because they know it works. And if you have a large supply of wood on your property, why wouldn't you? Of course you're going to use it. It saves you a few dollars in the long run. And we all know it's no longer easy to save a few dollars. I was watching one of these Ultimate Prepper shows. One of the guys on the program, he actually had a truck, and he was running it with a little wood stove in the box of the truck. I thought, that is impressive. But he says the day may come when a lot of people are going to need that design. 8:30, I've got a guest coming up in just a few minutes talking about a great advertising opportunity. You're listening to Bill Colley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 39 at our studios. Hope you can stick around. I wanted to remind everyone that coming up on Wednesday morning from 8:30 until 9 o'clock, we are going to be joined, of course, by some medical professionals in studio. And they may have an opportunity to take some of your telephone calls. We have a number of things we can discuss with them, everything from various health issues you may have, just, major or minor, to vaccinations. Big story in one of our state papers about vaccinations and the lack of people in Idaho. Almost 50% of people in Idaho who are now skipping vaccinations for their children. So there are a lot of interesting things we have to talk with my friends at Tripp Family Medicine. And they're going to be live with me again this Wednesday during Top Story, discussing issues that are important to you. And you'll have an opportunity to talk to the medical professionals as well. We have doctors who will be joining us from week to week, sometimes a physician's assistant. We can have some of the nurses come by, but all of these people will be here available to talk with you and take some of your questions. So tune in each Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. for Better Health, brought to you by Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, across from the post office on Fillmore Street, because life's too short not to feel good. Also wanted to remind you, if you're looking to pick up a few extra dollars, and who isn't? Believe me, we're all in need of a few extra dollars. No one ever says, I've got too much. Well, okay, maybe a handful of people. But most people aren't in that bit of luxury. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. That's 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I mentioned Randy Staples will be joining us in just a few minutes. We'll be following up with Randy right after the break at 8:40 this morning, and he'll be with us until 9 o'clock. If you have not checked out his Idaho Weekly Briefing, it is really just chock full of all sorts of detailed information about state government, about some local issues going on too as well. And he even gives you a rundown of what candidates for various offices have raised, how much money they have in their campaign accounts, how much is available for spending. I mean, the rich detail that he offers with this is really, it's amazing. And he's doing all of this, he said, pretty much on his own. So it's a full-time job to compile this, because the weekly briefing, is sometimes 40 or 50 pages in length. I saw something that I had to just share with you very quickly over the weekend. Now, a lot of you find that this spring ahead, when we do the time change to daylight savings time, is frankly a pain in the derriere. And I'm going to be putting my 2 cents in today and say that I agree with you. There is an effort, of course, it seems every year in Idaho to get us out of daylight savings time. And a lot of people around the country are questioning how valuable it actually is. Some people yesterday may have been late for church or other appointments, or they may be today just simply because they forgot those clocks were supposed to spring ahead sometime in the middle of the night on Sunday, and they didn't do it. Well, I got up yesterday morning, and I actually went to a later church service just because I did have the time to get there, but I was trying to do some things around the house. But it does disrupt your sleep pattern, sometimes for a couple of weeks. 5 myths about daylight saving time. This from the Washington Post over the weekend. Daylight savings time was meant to help farmers. That is a myth. According to the writer, the reverse is true. Farmers actually objected to it. And the writer makes a great point. If you're a dairy farmer especially, the cows don't get this daylight savings time. Their schedule doesn't change. You understand how that works. Number 2, the extra daylight makes us healthier and happier. Not true. She said some of the ridiculous arguments have come from liberals like Ed Markey, who is a Democrat from Massachusetts. He said that the additional vitamin D you get from the sunshine is good for you. Okay. I just read yesterday a story about where Joan Collins, the actress, she's 81 years old, she still has good skin, and when she was asked why, she said, I don't go out in the sun. So there you have it. But unfortunately, there have been health issues related to daylight savings time, and in some cases, people are discovering there are more workplace accidents in the first week to 2 weeks after we make the switch in the spring, just simply because people's sleep rhythms are disrupted. And because of that, some of these accidents can be deadly. Some of these stories, or some of the research, has been done inside mines. And in the mines, they've discovered it's a very dangerous situation. Number 3, it helps us conserve energy. That's also apparently a bunch of baloney. It mentions that some of the states that have tried this and made some of the changes on their own have discovered that in actuality it's cost them more in energy and a loss of business productivity. Number 4, it benefits business. Well, the writer says if you're selling grills or charcoal, maybe yes. But for instance, television viewing goes way down. Television viewing drops off and almost goes off the shelf in that particular situation. Also for airlines and for railroads, things are even worse. And then it mentions, why do we call it standard time if we're only in standard time for less than half the year? Because daylight savings time now takes up almost 8 months out of our year. So some of the questions that are being raised, I think, probably make us sit back and say, why can't we get this changed? Well, it's a little bit like the tax code, isn't it? We don't get any changes in the tax code because simply, well, let's be honest about it. Everyone talks a good game, but someone somewhere is actually benefiting from it. And probably daylight savings time is resulting in the same situation. It's 8:39. 39 at our studios. Bill Colley with you. Randy Staple is coming up next from the Idaho Weekly Briefing, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We are about 17 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, 40 at our studios. Looking at a week ahead that's going to be, I would say, warm. A couple of days already predicted to be in the 70s. And, of course, News Radio 1310 KLIX can also be heard at newsradio1310.com on the web. That means you can listen to us anywhere around the world. And generally at this time on Monday mornings, we spend a few minutes with Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing. Today being no different. Randy joining us this morning. And I was looking through the briefing this morning, Randy. First of all, welcome back to the program.
Well, good to be back.
And I've got to be honest with you, because you do put such an effort into this. I really don't know where I can start, because I just started hopping around and I wrote down about 6 things. Probably we won't get to all 6. But could I start out by asking about this argument that's going on about the spent nuclear fuel, because 2 former governors are battling the current governor, and it's difficult to, especially in the regulatory atmosphere we live in, to make heads or tails of what's really going on here.
Well, it goes back a long ways. This has been a fight that's been going on for a very long time. It was going on back in the late 80s when Cecil Andrus was governor, and at one point he threatened to use the state police to keep any federal agencies from bringing the spent nuclear waste into Idaho. And the battle was taken up by his successor, Phil Batt. So that's a Democrat and a Republican. And Batt reached an agreement. It was a very well-known agreement, very high profile, and it was even the subject of a statewide initiative with the federal government that no new waste would be brought in, at least after a short period of time, and that over a period of about 30 years, it would have to be removed from Idaho. Now, this has been a difficult problem all over the place. Batt pointed out, and correctly, that no other state had an agreement quite like this. But no state wants the nuclear waste. In Nevada, it's there's a lot of talk about storage at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. In Nevada, storage at Yucca Mountain is a very unpopular proposition. It's not a lot more popular in New Mexico, where there's been a waste storage facility developed, but which has problems of its own. So it's a big problem. Where do you put it? It has to go somewhere. And this has been a very long scale fight, and people take different views on it. Governor Otter maintains that what he's doing is not out of line with the past agreements. It allows in some waste, but then some of the original agreements allowed in a little with provisions that would be taken out soon. But then there have been questions about just how honest the feds have been on some of this, and the governors Andrus and Batt have both maintained that there's been a real history of dishonesty. They even use the word lying through time. So it's been a long, hot fight for a very long period of time.
Of course, when fellows are no longer in office, they can actually say what's on their mind. Like they can use the word lying, which would
they can, and they've been very, very blunt. They've been following this closely for quite some time, and they've been very blunt in speaking out on it.
You had a lengthy commentary going into some depth today about that issue about prayer at the legislature, where last week there was a Hindu prayer, and of course, a listener explained it to me this way a few days ago. You can have no prayer, or you can have prayer from a variety of different religious faiths. So you don't have much of a choice, was how he was explaining this. And I've seen this argued in some other governments as well. But as I was reading about this story last week and hearing some of those initial details about it, I remember a Supreme Court case from not too long ago, within the last 10 years, and I think it was centered in Denver, where there was a religious cult. And what they do is they have a taxidermist stuff dead dogs. They put these inside a temple, and they were looking to fill a park with some of their religious artifacts. And the court said, if we allowed everyone to do this, there wouldn't be any public space left. So I don't know how far does it go. I don't have an issue with a Hindu prayer. I have friends of that background, but if we have 100 faiths or 200 faiths.
No, and you can't accommodate everybody. I guess the idea would be that really that you can't accommodate absolutely everyone, because there are almost an endless number of faiths out there, and even within Christianity there are many different points of view. There's a very wide variety there, and not all can be accommodated. Some of that kind of issue has come up in cases during Christmas seasons with nativity and other displays. Just how many can you physically, practically accommodate? I guess one way to look at it is not so much the idea that absolutely everyone is accommodated, but that there is enough variety spread around so that no one has a really dominant or a too dominant position, so that people don't feel that one point of view is being represented in the chamber to the exclusion of everyone else.
We've got about 10 minutes until 9 o'clock. It's coming up on 8:50. In fact, in just a few seconds, 40 at our studios on Top Story and News Radio 1310 KLIX. Bill Colley, along with our guest, Randy Staples, from Idaho Weekly Briefing this morning. And the thing is, some of the people who actually decided to boycott the prayer, I guess they just end up looking petty by doing that.
Well, I think that's the way it wound up looking. And there are, I think the people who invited them in or accepted the invitation, which would be the leadership in the state senate, took the attitude that we can look better than we sometimes look. Some of these, I call them the quotes that shot round the world from Idaho. There have been a number of those this session. By inviting someone from a faith that had not previously delivered that kind of a short address in an Idaho legislative chamber, they look a little bigger, and I think they did, and it all went very well except for the 3 or 4 protesters who stood outside.
I was looking at that matter, and there's an argument that could be made. I know some people feel that if we're not praying at our legislatures, that somehow then God will ignore us. But I'm asking you to speculate here, and I know that may not necessarily be what you want to do, but my feeling is if you're a believer and you pray on your way in on your own, you've pretty much accomplished what you were looking to do in the first place. So we may end up getting to that point where there is no prayer and people can just be told, do it on your own.
Well, they could, and there's certainly no provision against that. The Supreme Court decision you were referring to a while back made the argument that prayer on the floors in legislative chambers are something not for the larger, or intended not for the larger public as such, but for the members of the chamber. And if that's the case, then they could do it at any place that they like. They wouldn't necessarily have to do it on the floors of the chambers. It's very common. It's something that just about all states, either all states or nearly all states, do. It's not. This is by no means an Idaho-specific kind of thing. But yeah, I think that could be a possibility, but I don't see that coming down the road anytime real soon.
Now, I was working in Sussex County, Delaware, when they had two cases, one with county government and one with a local school district. And I believe that the county government now, they do have the prayer, but they do it before they gavel the meeting into session.
And that might be a way. That could always be a way around it. Of course, this was a symbolic kind of thing anyway. It was the idea of bringing in an additionally large group of people. The Idaho legislature has at times just had one designated person to deliver the prayer, and there was talk when that happened during those times that's probably not the best way to do it. That's really just kind of bringing in one church, one minister as almost sort of the official minister or church for the legislature, and that didn't seem to set entirely well either.
On a note that's almost entirely different here, and this probably for people who like to go to some resort areas in the state, a story has popped up that says they're looking to increase the liquor licenses in some resorts, and I would assume Sun Valley, for instance, would be included in that, and a few other places around the state. What's the goal with that? Is that just acknowledging that you have a much larger tourist population showing up?
It is, and the growth of the tourist industry and the growth of resort areas. It's kind of an amusing topic because it's one of the many kinds of exceptions that get built into the law in the liquor license area. The basic idea with liquor licenses is that you get them by each city, and each city is able to determine them by their population. But this creates all sorts of issues, difficulties, problems. There have been cities created in Idaho specifically so that the area could get a liquor license specifically for that purpose and nothing else. So that's kind of an odd variation. That's where you get into issues about what the population is, or even merging cities. And then it also leaves open the question of, well, what about commercial, recreational, or resort areas that are outside city limits? And you wind up with all kinds of legislative, you wind up with lots of groups before the legislature seeking exemptions and additions in terms of that. There's probably a point coming when the state just ought to take a revised look at how it awards liquor licenses and maybe consider a different way, except that there are so many people who have invested so much money into liquor licenses, because that's become the trade in them has become a commercial activity of itself, that it's now becoming more difficult to do that.
Of course, with so many tourists headed for areas that are really, in many cases, rural, not necessarily pristine anymore, but rural, obviously some people are thirsty at times, or they'd like a drink. That creates an obvious demand for it.
Sure, it does. It does, and that's that's part of what comes up. And as some people in Utah could tell you, the ability to get some sort of alcoholic beverage in a recreational or resort area is sometimes pretty decisive. If it's not available, that area may be skipped over in favor of another area in another state that does allow for it. And that's why Idaho has generally been fairly responsive to allowing some of these kinds of things. But it creates all kinds of odd situations. People who are included under certain terms, excluded. The state law in this area is a really a really interesting garble.
I was going to say, I when you explained the whole notion of having to have a city, and yeah, it's news to me. But then again, I'm not pursuing a liquor license. So, well, Randy Staples, for people who'd like to check out Idaho Weekly Briefing, what would you recommend they do? I
would send them to our website at www.reidenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
We look forward to talking to you again in a week or so. Actually, I guess a week to be exact. And I hope you have a great week, and I know you're going to be busy.
You too. I'm sure this will be a busy time in Twin, and, well, it will be in Boise. I know that.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Randy Staple is joining us from Idaho Weekly Briefing this morning, coming up on 8:58:40 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also anywhere around the world on newsradio1310.com. Coming up in the next hour of the program, story out of, speaking of newspapers, story out of the Idaho Statesman, actually a guest commentary. And the writer says, broader gun ownership actually reduces gun crimes. Wouldn't that be a shocker for that Alexander fellow over at the Times News? But the writer actually has the statistics to back up what he's talking about. In fact, I posted his comments yesterday at our KLIX Facebook page, along with a video from Bill Whittle, which makes the same argument. Details on that on the way in just a few minutes. But first, Fox News, coming up at 9 o'clock on News Radio 1310 KLIX. You probably are like me. You meet a great many people who give lip service to the Constitution and talk about its importance in American history and in our daily lives. And then when you actually start talking about individual components of the Constitution, they say, well, times have changed, and maybe we need to reconsider that. I tend to take the view because the people who drafted that Constitution, they also put in place a system of checks and balances. And since their mindset was checks and balances when they were putting together the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments, they saw this as an interlocking structure. So if you pull you ever see that game Jenga? You keep pulling the wood pegs out, and then you pull another wood peg out, and eventually it comes collapsing down. I think it's very similar in that notion. I mean, we're not talking literally, of course, like a game like that, but you get my drift. You have to have all of these components in order to ensure its success. I have heard over the last month, ever since there was a proposal by some legislators here in Idaho to remove this whole notion of a permit for concealed carry, that was a very dangerous move, and that if we did that, we would have dangerous people roaming the streets. We would have a lawless Wild West. Now, you can go back to the people who, many of them tell you are constitutionalists, and say, the Second Amendment doesn't say anything about needing your permission. Well, yeah, but, again, what part of the Constitution are you proposing we shred? Well, I'm not, but... Well, then, let's have a moment here and listen to your argument. If you were in a courtroom and you were sitting on the witness stand right now, the lawyer would be shredding you instead of the Constitution. You're aware of that, right? 8 minutes after 9 o'clock, 41. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also, you can hear us anywhere around the world at newsradio1310.com. And I happen to see something in the pages of the Idaho Statesman. Guest opinion, gun control laws don't create safety, only illusions. And the writer is Clayton E. Kramer. He's a college professor. He is also, it says he's a software engineer by day, amateur astronomer by night. I'm going to move to page 2 very, very quickly and share with you something that he's bringing up. He said, how could repealing a gun control law reduce murder rates? Because gun control laws are primarily passed to create the illusion of safety. And this follows what he has mentioned earlier in the column. He gives you a series of states where they have already passed similar legislation, and the number of homicides have gone down. The homicide rate has dropped. So for all of the arguments that this is going to create some sort of lawless society, the result actually has been we've seen the figures go in the other direction. He says, for example, states that have adopted mandatory background checks on firearms transfers since 1960 are more likely to have murder rates rise than fall. Of course, he says, I am assuming concealed weapon licensing is about reducing murder and non-negligent manslaughter and not just making people feel safe. But he says American history suggests otherwise. And it's going through all of this, breaking it down. If you didn't see this, it's really wonderful reading. Again, I know for the lefties out there, this is counterintuitive that if people can defend themselves, Or if the notion is the guy that lives next door, if I go kick in his door, he might defend himself, it might actually deter me from committing the crime. Funny how that works. I posted this story, a link to this story, if you have access to our website, well, not our website per se, our Facebook page. And that is News Radio 1310 KLIX on Facebook. You can find that very link to his arguments. And again, he backs it up with numbers. This is not some erratic, emotional, immature newspaper editor rambling on about how knuckle-draggers in Idaho aren't nearly as smart as the brethren he grew up with on Long Island. This is a fellow who's actually giving you the breakdown, the actual numbers of what's happened in states where they have eliminated that permit processing for concealed carry. And yes, the homicide rates have dropped significantly. I also have on that very same Facebook page, I have included a link in the comments section just below this man's commentary, and I have attached a video as well from Bill Whittle. Some of you may know who Bill Whittle is. He's works for Truth Revolt and a few other right-of-center publications. And the reason we have to have those in the internet age is because Lefty won't give us any coverage. Lefty wouldn't tell you about these issues. I posted Bill Whittle's video about gun crimes around the world. Where do you think the United States ranks per capita? Per capita, where do you think we rank? Do you realize that we're 111th? Yes, we're 111th. We would be even lower. We would be tied virtually with Belgium, which is a tiny little country and very homogeneous country in Western Europe. We would be tied with Belgium if we didn't have to account for about 8 cities in this country run by Democrats for decades. Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia. You get my drift? On the other hand, the place with the most easiest gun access in America, Plano, Texas, has virtually no homicides. And that's a large city now. At one time, it was considered just to be a suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth, but Plano now is a city in its own right. And Plano has opened the doors and said, if you'd like to carry, that's your business. The result being Plano, Texas has virtually no crime. I was thinking last week about this terrible story that Philadelphia had, where a police officer was shot and killed by a couple of thugs. He had gone, his son's 10th birthday is today. Dad, who was a police officer, had gone into a GameStop to buy a present for his son. And he happened to be in there, and when the 2 thugs came in, guns drawn, he was able to fire back, return fire, and he perhaps saved the lives of everyone else in the store. They shot and killed him. But it just shows you how someone armed with a gun can prevent a crime and save lives, even in one of these big bastions of liberalism. It's 9:14. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning. 41 at our studios. You can reach our program at 736-0300. That would be 736-0300. So if you go to our Facebook page and you check that out, you can read the piece from this man in Boise, as well as watch the Bill Whittle video. And it'll give you an impression that perhaps the folks in establishment media are plainly lying to us when it comes to facts and figures about guns. Also, Washington Examiner today. Just say no to executive action gun control. A writer there at the editorial board is saying, and this is not a liberal publication by any means. Most of the people who work there are already writing for Weekly Standard or National Review. The writer says these guns are very expensive. He's talking about AR-15s, and he said they're not a threat because most people can't afford them. They're also too large to conceal, 20 inches long. Yeah, it's noticeable if you're walking down the street with one of those, isn't it? And do not appear to have been used at any time against police. At any time. Do not appear to have been used at any time. But the Obama White House is saying these are used against police. Despite, again, 330 million Americans and probably a couple of million police officers. Never once has an AR-15 been used against them. Hello? Anybody want to comment on that at the White House? The writer says that's why America's most influential police organization, that would be the Fraternal Order of Police, has already said that the whole idea of banning ammunition for these AR-15s is simply ridiculous. Again, why can't we get this across to Lefty? Is it Lefty's own fear that he might blow his own toes off? Or be like a Ralphie in A Christmas Story and shoot his eye out? And that therefore he's got to run around and ensure that the rest of us? Or is he just angry because everybody he knows that owned a gun, back in high school, they pushed Lefty into a locker? And maybe that's what this really has, the ultimate part of it really is all about. The writer says, finally, it does not appear that the ammo in question is legally subject to alcohol, tobacco, and firearm regulation. The law the agency is citing in order to regulate this bullet does not cover ammunition containing any significant amount of lead, as this bullet does. So, once again, the Obama White House trying to rule by fiat, that is, King Obama, King Barack Hussein Obama, once again, trying to dictate to you how you are going to live in this country, despite the fact he is just 1/3 of a branch, of a co-equal branch in the federal government. And when we elected him, we did not tell him that he was going to become dictator. We said, you're going to be president, and you're going to solve unemployment problems in this country. And immediately instead, he said, tell you what, let's give you a health care plan instead, and then let me tell you how I'm going to run your life and continue to tax you more and more and more. You can also reach me this morning if you're fearful of talking on the telephone for giving your spirit away or something. Bill.Colley, and that's at townsquaremedia.com. Last name is spelled Colley. Bill.Colley at townsquaremedia.com. Wouldn't it be nice? See, the Idaho Statesman at least published this guest editorial with these statistics. Wouldn't it be nice if these Cabernet-sipping liberals over at the Times News would do the same thing and be objective when they were sitting there railing against, but we know how they think about us. As I said earlier, when it comes to parental involvement in education, they claim that this is all just part of jingoism. That's the word that was used. That it was part of jingoism. The same writers keep claiming that people here are something akin to the Ku Klux Klan, making comparisons to the way Alabama was in the 1950s or Mississippi was in the early 1960s. They have an outright disgust and hate of the people they have to live around, which is why you see these types of reactions and why we don't get the truth when it comes to something along the lines of gun ownership and your Second Amendment rights. I've got a lot more coming up this morning. Do want to point out, we have a great many people in the area. The unemployment rate in Idaho is a little below the national average. Saw those statistics this morning. But still, there are people who are looking for a little extra money perhaps in their lives. And we'd like to recommend checking in with Western States Bus Services. A good way to work with people, good way to work with children, good way to be a good servant by helping them get to and from school. They're looking for part-time bus drivers at Western States Bus Services, split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour, and you can apply today, and you can contact them at 733-8003. That telephone number again is 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Do hope you check them out. We had some of the nice folks from there on the program with us just a few weeks ago, and they will actually do the training as well. I'd need that. With my Coke bottle bottom glasses and a lazy eye on one side, I'm not even sure the training could help me, but they will work with you and they will ensure that when you come out of that course, that you are certified, unlike those of us who are certifiable, that you would be certified and you can go ahead and get that license and begin driving school bus. Some of the other things we're talking about this morning coming up on the way. There's a distrust of vaccinations in Idaho. In fact, one of the highest rates in the country. Secondly, there is this is even more frightening, I think, than the Iran deal in many respects. But the Obama White House is working with the United Nations to set up an international climate criminal court. In other words, they would prosecute what are called climate criminals. And he may try to bypass Congress on this one as well. Details on the way. Idaho is among the leading states in the country where People are foregoing vaccinations for their children. That also is alarming the liberal newspaper crowd. 9:23, Bill Colley with you on Top Story, 42 at our studios. And you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. You can also hear us online anywhere at newsradio1310.com. Story actually appeared in the Idaho Statesman, and it says, Idaho parents increasingly gun-shy over getting shots for their children. I wonder why they use the word gun-shy. Is there something subliminal there, too? But there is a very touching and sad story that's included in here. I printed this out. This is long. This is one of those that they actually sent a reporter out, probably gave the reporter a couple of days to work without any other distractions. If you print this story out online, it comes out to about 11 pages in length. But there's the story about a woman who took her young and healthy baby to the doctor for shots. And unfortunately, the next morning the baby was dead. The autopsy came back and said cause of death is really inconclusive. I don't know about you, but if you were in that situation, would you then have your other children vaccinated? She has not. She has decided that after losing one child after vaccinations, this is the thing. I believe in the argument that getting a vaccination for your child is probably a good thing when it comes to certain diseases. I had the chicken pox as a child. I had the mumps as a child. The chicken pox have left me with some scars. And I likely will be in that group of people because the numbers are, when you get older, you end up with shingles after you've had the chicken pox. So I'll likely be in that category or that group because of that. When my daughter was little, she had all of her shots. I don't like to talk about this on the radio. She also has Asperger's syndrome. And we don't know if that came along after the series of vaccinations. But I'm telling you today, and it's tough for me to talk about this publicly, but after she had all of her vaccinations, she seemed to change. And growing up was very difficult for her. Concentrating in school was very difficult for her. Making friendships with other people was very difficult for her. And she went from being this kind, loving little girl to going into that situation later in life and struggling through school and struggling with social relationships. Luckily, she's in college now, and things seem to be improving because there are people out there who specialize in working with young people like her. And she's very, very brilliant to be honest about it. But I've often wondered, was there something that led to that, some trigger or some causality that brought that about? Because as a parent, it's terribly heartbreaking. And I do know parents today, some of them are medical professionals who do not get their children vaccinated. I realize this baby that died in Boise, that you can say, all right, but 10,000 babies didn't die, or maybe 100,000 babies didn't die. But the fact of the matter is, the federal government does have a program in place. The federal government does have a program in place, and you know what they do? That program is designed to reimburse those parents whose children die after getting their vaccinations. If it wasn't a concern, there wouldn't be a federal program. It's 9:27 at KLIX, and you're on the air with Bill Colley.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. This thing about the vaccinations is the purpose why I listen to this radio station, to get an idea of how Idahoans are dealing with all of this corruption that's coming down on them here. But something else, too, when this idea of changing the time every year, God sets the times. That's what that's all about. Who do you serve?
And we human beings are just sort of shifting it around like a blanket being pulled from one end of the bed to the other.
Pardon me?
We human beings, when it comes to time, we just shift it around like a blanket being pulled from one end of the bed to the other.
Yeah, that's what the government wants to do to us. Yeah. It's like the driver's license. You know, it's written by the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. Well, when the servants of the Antichrist stop you, they want to see 3 witnesses of who do you serve. Show me your driver's license, proof of insurance, and vehicle registration. God said, peace be unto you, as my Father has sent me, even so I send you. He came without a driver's license.
Well, and thank you for the call. I'm going to add to that driver's license for just a quick minute before we have our 9:30 break, and we're coming up on that. We have, at least in Idaho, as I understand it, been fighting this federally compliant driver's license. Now, I don't have that special gold star on my license from my last state. I refused it. And I was told, well, after 2014, you can't go into a federal building. Well, why would I want to go into a federal building? Well, you need a new Social Security card. Well, I've got two of those because I'd misplaced one. I got one in the mail afterwards, secondary. But you have all of these ridiculous arguments and notions taking place about why you, as a liberty-loving American citizen, guaranteed rights by God, need to have all of these permission slips from government to even move around any longer. I mean, this is horse manure when you come right down to it. It's plain asinine. The thing is, Idaho objected to this license long enough, but it looks as if eventually they're going to throw in the towel on this one, and sure enough, you will have to have that little mark on your driver's license, that little star that says you are federally compliant and that you are following Big Brother. We've got more coming up. There is an effort to try criminals for climate crimes, and your president may allow the United Nations to tackle you on that. It's 9:30. I was telling you in the last hour of the show about the people who are complaining that Idahoans burn too much wood, create too much pollution. Of course, also are being blamed people in Washington State and Oregon as well. And you know the regulators are going to be stepping in and trying to curb wood-burning stoves or fireplaces in order to protect the planet so that we might all be able to live without rising seas and drought. We've already got that. Yes, because of your bad behavior. Yeah, but we've had it off and on for millions of years. Don't give me that. I am instructing you on how to live. So we were telling you about that a bit earlier. Well, you could, apparently, if you were going to be a fireplace scofflaw, you could end up being tried by an international court. The coming climate court, the headline in the Washington Times, the proposed Paris Agreement is another reach for global power. Your good friends at the United Nations have devised this. Yes, they are coming for you, ever so slowly. 9:34:42 at our station. That's called News Radio 1310 KLIX. You can also hear us all around the world at newsradio1310.com if you're listening to us online. The text agreed to for negotiation by your federal government includes a remarkable proposal. Buried deep inside, it proposes an international climate justice tribunal in order to oversee, control, and sanction the fulfillment of and compliance with the obligations of Annex 1 and Annex 2 parties under this agreement and the 1992 UNFCCC Climate Treaty. They said a mouthful, didn't they? So, President Obama could be willing to hand you over to a foreign power for trial. Translated, the writer says, this means that even if the Obama White House refuses to call the Paris Agreement a treaty, as it already telegraphed its position, a new climate court would hold us to its terms, even the terms of a prior, quote, voluntary, unquote, agreement. This presumably seeks to address the problem our Constitution's ratification requirement poses to any binding, quote, climate change, unquote, treaty. So in other words, Mr. King Obama is going to try to circumvent our Constitution again, and he'll turn you over, perhaps to an enemy power to be tried for burning wood in a fireplace or a wood stove. 9:36. You're on the air with Bill Colley this morning.
Yeah, Bill, I was listening to you this morning, and you were saying that everybody says burning wood is inefficient. Well, that's partially true. One of our forefathers figured that out and made a different type of stove, didn't he?
Yes, still known as the Franklin stove.
And if you use that stove properly and dampen it properly, a log of wood will burn for a long time in a lot of heat. And where you put it is also so. It's so relevant. I mean, I don't care what kind of heat you use. If you don't do it properly, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously people do know that if you have electric heat, you don't open up the windows in the dead of winter while the electric heat is on. That you just got to follow
and you don't put something in front of it that's going to deflect the heat. You don't do this. You don't. I don't care. I've gone in the houses and saw heaters on regular forced air heat, and they've got the couch sitting over the vent. Well, what good is that?
You have a nice warm couch, at least on the bottom.
Yeah, it makes a warm couch, but it takes longer to heat the room. So it's all relevant. It's just idiotic.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Thank you much for the call, sir. Can you imagine, though, that you could be? I don't think they're going to be taking people out of their homes for burning wood and taking them to be tried by the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. But they may come after somebody who runs a large company, or they may come after you if you at one time, and look, if you created a toxic waste dump, you've already paid your penalty here in the good old USA, but you could be facing some sort of double jeopardy with all of this. Or they may just say that certain countries are guilty and try the entire country in absentia and then put sanctions on that country following that. Now, you'd think that the Chinese would be worried, but they will likely have the big cudgel with the world's largest economy now, that they'll be able to control that, and they'll just say, well, it's the imperialist USA. That's what this is really all about. It's about taking down your country. But it would not be a stretch if you have an international climate criminal court. It would not be doesn't matter the size of the polluter, right? It could be somebody dumping sludge into one of the Great Lakes, or it could be you pumping some smoke from your fireplace into the sky. We are living in some very dangerous times. Does this man in the White House, we don't think he loves his country. We know that, right? We heard that argument from Rudy Giuliani, and basically most of us agreed with that. But he doesn't love you. In fact, he's looking at you as being a villain. This guy wanted your votes, and then he turns around and attempts to destroy you. Something's not quite right with this scenario. It's 9:39. We have about 20 minutes left before we wrap up the program today. Also, the Huckabee Report is coming along in about 10 minutes. We'll have Governor Huckabee giving us some of his thoughts today, too, with his daily commentary. I do want to mention before we wrap up the show that group of college students who decided to ban the American flag in California. Apparently, they sobered up and have reversed course. We get an opportunity, I'll bring that up before we wrap up the show. But in the meantime, we have some messages from some of our fine sponsors. Please support them. You want to support me? Support those people who back me up. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com online. You're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story. Friend of mine, he knows a little bit about radio. He was on the phone with me my first week on the air here. He just called in to say hello. And I'd mentioned he is one of the co-creators of the Dan Patrick Show, which is America's most popular sports talk show. But my friend is also what I would call a very devout Christian and conservative. And he sent me a link from American Thinker this morning, and it says, here's the headline. Maybe we can get to this in the next few days. Teacher admits he wrote Common Core to end white privilege. That's what it's. That's why the folks over at the Times News writing the editorials don't want parental involvement. It's all of that white privilege in Idaho schools. We have to be rid of it. You know this. I'll get to caller. Hold on just a moment. I'll get to my callers in just a moment. But I've never experienced this white privilege. If I was driving 15 miles over the speed limit, I bet I'd get a ticket too. It's not like a trooper walks up and says, "Hey, it's one of my fellow whiteys. Yeah, just go ahead." I don't go into the bank and they don't throw money over the counter at me, despite what Eddie Murphy says. When I was going to school, the teachers gave me a very hard time. I might have done it too, in reverse. But they didn't let me get away with anything. There was no privilege for me. I see this stuff and I just roll my eyes. 9:45, you're on the air with Bill Colley on KLIX. All right, well, let's try number 2. That's not a judgment, by the way. It's just you're the second caller in this segment. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, Bill, I think it's a real double standard. You know, it's funny how these guys, for years now, have been telling us how we shouldn't be the police of the world. And I agree, we don't have to be the police of the world. But it's funny how they turn around and take their big old thumb and just start pushing down on us, on everything we do. And for some reason, the left just thinks that's great because we're not policing the world, but we're destroying our own Constitution and our own rights. Every day we lose more and more, and they're okay with that. It's such a double standard and hypocritical. I just don't understand it at all.
There's a view that somehow we earned this punishment because of some past sins by ancestors. Is that it?
Yeah, well, their view is same thing that we're having problems with all these 110%ers and these Muslims. They go through history or anything, and they find one thing that they hate, and they focus on that one thing, but not the whole picture, not the whole chapter, not the whole story. Just a piece of it, and then let's get pissed off about it.
I thank you much for the call. I was thinking about how they're trying to even the score on the left. The New York Times, which is the Bible of American liberalism, if you did not know this story yet, the New York Times in its coverage over the weekend of the 50th anniversary of the Selma, Alabama March, airbrushed President George W. Bush and his wife Laura out of its cover picture. Why? Well, they are privileged white Republicans, and they wanted to have Mr. Obama walking instead, just the photo centered on him, walking next to somebody in a wheelchair. Now, it's not censorship of the news, but it is essentially altering the news, is it not? And this being done by a newspaper which claims that it's got the highest standards of journalism in the country. Again, they airbrushed the pictures of Mr. Bush and his wife out so that you would not see it in their coverage, to give the impression that he was not there. I am sick to death of this. First of all, I had nothing to do with enslaving anyone. I was at home that night doing my homework. Number two, just because somebody who looked perhaps a bit like me 300 years ago was mean to somebody else who looked a bit like them 300 years ago does not in any way make me responsible. I have no guilt. I was not there. I did not condone it. I did not participate in it. I did not promote it. So therefore, I don't owe you everything I have. I don't owe you a job if you are not you're not as qualified as I am. I don't owe you good grades. I don't owe you a cheap house with a mortgage you might not be able to pay off. I am not responsible for all of those things. I was raised being told that, once you're 18 years old, you are on your own, because that's the way mom and dad were raised. And I was told you will either sink or swim. I've been spending 30 years treading water, so I know how that works. But I am sick to death of being told that I am responsible for somebody else's, in many cases, either incompetence, laziness, or stupidity. Gee, I just described a union member. I'm sorry, we shouldn't be doing that, because labor unions are a good thing. Workers of the world unite. Coming up on Mike Huckabee in just a couple of minutes, or a few seconds actually, the Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. You can reach them by calling 736-6563. That number again at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Governor Huckabee, I believe, was among those people in Iowa the other day. Jeb Bush was there too, and of course the newspapers all said, oh, he did very well. They're trying to create Jeb Bush as being that there's a groundswell for him, because they know he's going to be the easiest Bobo doll to knock over when it comes to the general election against one of their fellow travelers. You just wait and see. They've got this all plotted out, just like they did in 2008 and 2012. Thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. And we have just a couple of minutes before we wrap up this morning. Rush Limbaugh, scheduled following news at 10 o'clock from the Fox Radio Network. Got to work on changing the clocks in this room. They're both still on standard time, which, as we mentioned earlier, isn't really standard. But coming up after 10 o'clock news from Fox, we'll have Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity following news at 1 o'clock from Fox, and then, of course, Glenn Beck following news at 4 o'clock from Fox this afternoon. Bill Colley with you. It's 9:54, 44 at our studios at News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online, anywhere around the world at newsradio1310.com. And you're up next.
Hey, Bill, do you think, just by chance, these protests over there in Oklahoma at the university, how the racist type stuff is going on over there, just and they're just appalled by what they're doing. Do you think that maybe the left is orchestrated this?
Yeah, and you know, and sometimes somebody does a tongue-in-cheek joke or thinks it's funny, and unfortunately, even in this day and age, Lefty doesn't have a sense of humor. I thank you for the call. What's going on campuses, though, as we were just hearing in the Huckabee report, this business about these students in California, I have a list of the actual grievances that they used in banning the American flag. Of course, it got reversed, but you wonder just how much dope they were smoking before they went into that meeting. You're up next, and good morning to you. Hello?
Oh, hello. Hey, I'd just like to comment on your thing about being guilty. At the time when we had slavery in this country, and that's what they're laying all this guilt about, every country in the world had slavery, and we were the first ones to get rid of it. I think that they ought to put us up as a standard on the hill instead of beating us down. Of course, Obama will never do that. Because
so one of the criticisms, in fact, was, in that two-thirds compromise where they said that in the southern states that the blacks were only counted as two-thirds for representational purposes. Blacks have always argued, well, they claimed we were just two-thirds human. But no, that was the first recognition that they were human in the first place anywhere around the world when people were living in slave-owning cultures.
Yeah, and then so we were the first ones to come out of that, and we were the only, we weren't doing anything different than the rest of the world was. We were the first ones to recognize it was wrong. So where's the guilt?
Yeah, like I say, I didn't happen to be there at the time. I thank you much for the telephone call. You also have to note, the biggest slaveholders in the world today, Muslims. Your good friends and the religion of peace. We have one last caller. Time for one last caller coming up on 9:57. You're on KLIX. Oh, somebody figured out that the time-wise we might not be able to quite squeeze them in there. You look at the Boko Haram. You look at ISIS, but it's not even these terrorist organizations. Muslims around the Middle East and North Africa and in Central Africa and in parts of Asia have been holding slaves for a millennia or more. Why aren't we recognizing that? Why don't we hear more about that? Well, because they're the religion of peace and they're victims because they've had to put up with you colonial Americans. That's why, your colonial designs on that part of the world. All right, we'll squeeze a caller in very quickly. You're on the air.
All right, I just want to throw one more thing on top of the last caller. They don't ever mention the fact that they got put into slavery by competing tribes, which were black, that sold them off the coast, and the people that were selling them were Muslims.
Yes.
So, they don't want to talk about that stuff. They just want to talk about what makes it guilty for us. And for furthermore, do they think they would have had a better life if they weren't sold at all? In a situation where they had nothing?
Well, that part we'll never know. But I thank you for the call. Just look at it this way. I guess the reparations check is in the White House. But frankly, they're not going to be able to squeeze anything from me. You can't get blood from a turnip. News is coming up in just a moment at 10 o'clock on KLIX.